war in Europe officially began on September 1st, 1939, with the German and Soviet Union invasion of Poland. For 6 years and a day, the Great War would continue between the Axis forces led by Germany, Italy, and Japan, and the Allied forces led by Britain, France, the Soviet Union, and the United States.
May 28th, Leopold, King of the Belgians, surrenders, and the world despairs. Dunkirk. Here 300,000 Allied soldiers battle and swim to safety under an inferno of fire.
The first part of the war mostly took place in Europe. Germany, after a bitter defeat in the First World War, erupted once again in an attempt to conquer all of Europe. By June of 1940, Germany's Nazi forces had tanked their way through most of continental Europe, conquering countries such as Holland, Belgium, and Norway in quick succession. When the Nazis took over France, they were just one step away from European domination.
Now that Germany took over most of Europe, Hitler had only Britain left to conquer. Problem was, Britain was prepared. Britain knew from the moment of the Polish invasion that Germany was planning to go much further. They had to prepare for war. It wasn't just the military problem. They knew the Germans were coming hard. They've experienced it just a few decades ago in World War I. They knew they had to prepare as a whole nation. Many people decided they would contribute to the national defense by working in factories and donating metal products. Even women and children helped out in case of an emergency.
Mr. W.S. Morrison is here to explain. Now that you're receiving your ration books, he tells you what you should do now and what you may have to do if the need should come.
These little books.
Food rationing in the UK really shows the combined effort of the nation as a whole. Despite their strong belief in capitalist ideas, they were willing to give up some of their comfort, even if it meant adopting a policy strongly socialist. These efforts wouldn't disappoint, and Britain was the first country to block German forces from taking over their land.
Of all that's going.
Meanwhile, in the United States, Americans were enjoying a period of economic growth for the first time in years. As a system of democracy brought back a taste of prosperity in America, national pride for the country and its system skyrocketed. With the economic growth, America was able to prepare for the war in case she had to break the neutrality. This preparation would help later on to win the war for America and temporarily restore the world peace. Ironically, all this would not have been possible without the outbreak of war.
The recovery of the Great Depression in America owes a lot to the war in Europe. You see, the war dramatically increased the demand for steel and metal products, and amid the war, European countries just did not have the capacity to produce enough and fight at the same time. Germany, having prepared for many years for the war, had plenty of resources and equipment for the war. It was really the Allied forces, like England and France, that needed aid. They sought aid from none other than their old ally from World War I, the United States. The dilemma that FDR faced was that the neutrality of America would be at stake if she were to help the European countries. FDR attempted to solve this issue through the Lend-Lease Act of 1941. This act would allow America to give aid to Allied forces such as Britain, Russia, and China. War material that was rapidly producing in America's preparation in case of war was able to be exported. The demands for war material grew more than ever before, and Americans, men, women, and children alike, worked to produce more and more. Unemployment rates dropped, production grew, and exports greatly exceeded imports, all indications of a flourishing economy.
With further interactions between the warring nations and America, a simple question arose: should America join the war? Most Americans, enjoying the economic growth during the period of neutrality, did not want America to enter the war. However, some Americans knew that sooner or later, America would have to make the inevitable decision of which side to join. Among these Americans was one of the period's greatest writers, Ernest Hemingway.
Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls portrays an American soldier battling on foreign European soil. What makes it interesting is that it was published before America entered the war. This shows that Hemingway knew and foreshadowed in his novel the eventual bloodshed of American soldiers in Europe.
From the enactment of the Lend-Lease Act, Congress made itself clear on which side it would join if necessary. The alliance from World War I and the common system of democracy had Americans favoring the Allied forces as well. Of course, most Americans as well as Congress would have preferred to not go to war. However, the Axis forces were not stupid and felt that leaving America out would only mean more supplies for the Allies and a possible threat to their world dominance, even if all of Europe and Asia had been taken over. The Axis forces knew that they had to do something, and despite multiple incidents caused by Germany and Italy that arose anti-Axis moves in the US, Japan was the one that hit Americans hard.
In a matter of only 120 minutes and 2 waves of attack, the US's major naval base, Pearl Harbor, was demolished. 2,000 American lives were lost, with over 1,000 more wounded, and 19 ships destroyed. A surprise attack was launched by Japan in an effort to cripple the US Pacific Fleet. This would allow the Japanese to invade Southeast Asia for much-needed oil and other political endeavors without interruption. Hundreds of Japanese aircrafts and dive bombers swarmed the sky, aiming to destroy all of the US aircraft, battleships, and other high-value vehicles so that no offense could easily be mounted. A message, "Air Raid Pearl Harbor, this is not a drill," was sent out among the US forces from Patrol Wing 2. This did not stop the attack from devastating the base. Japan had not even formally declared war on the US. The news of the death of 2,402 Americans would first spread in Pearl Harbor, where the attack had taken place. Thousands of other soldiers and civilians who resided in Oahu witnessed the attack, felt the vibration of the ground, and saw the bodies of their friends and family. Some survivors remain now to deliver the shock of that day.
My feelings during the bombing of Pearl Harbor were encased in shock and bewilderment. I was amazed that the Japanese would do such a thing. I was not angered to the extent that my thinking was affected, but I would have been willing to shoot them all to stop the attack. I did not have any friends who died and was not motivated to look at any of the many bodies. There were many sailors trapped in the sunken ships who died. From the Japanese point of view, their attack was successful. They sunk 21 American warships and killed 2,338 military personnel and civilians. As one of their admirals were quoted, "We have succeeded in awakening the sleeping giant."
Mr. Vice President, Mr. Speaker, members of the Senate and of the House of Representatives, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
Roosevelt issued the presidential address to Congress of December 8, 1941, also called the Day of Infamy speech, the day after the attack on Pearl Harbor.
The bombing was significant in itself because otherwise the United States would not have put itself into the war so early, might never have been involved at all. And in the original document, Roosevelt had actually written that the attack would be a date that would live in world history, but he later revised it to read a date that would live in infamy. The aim was to elicit a strong emotional reaction from Americans, so he really manipulated his words, and it worked. Shortly after the delivery of the speech, the U.S. declared war on Japan. The Americans had believed that America was the untouchable mediator of the war, but with the attack, the Japanese had proved them wrong. Americans realized that they couldn't ignore the war anymore.
The war had grown at such a big scale that Americans themselves felt the need to get involved and do something, and they had to give it their all.
After Congress declared war on Japan with a unanimous vote, President Roosevelt officially signed the declaration in a black suit to signify the mourning of the Pearl Harbor attacks. The United States, from that moment forward, became part of World War II. A long period of war awaited Americans, soldiers, and civilians alike.